Welcome back to the Empire Builders podcast. Dave Young here with Stephen Semple, and we're telling the stories of empires, people that started with a little idea that ended up being huge. And as we got started here, Stephen whispered in my ear that we're going to talk about Hilton, and
Yeah.
we're not talking about Conrad's granddaughter, Paris Hilton, who made a big name in the '90s and 2000s. Uh, she
I was wondering if
she's
you were going to go
yeah,
there.
she's like chapter 3 of this story, I think.
We don't have time
For
for that story.
for her to have that lifestyle, Grandpa's got to make a lot of money.
Yeah, well, Conrad Hilton, I mean, Hilton is huge. They now
Yeah.
have over 1 million rooms. They have like 7,500 locations in 124 countries. But the interesting thing is, Conrad Hilton really invented how we look at hotels today. Like he really
Okay.
is the founder of that idea. And as we go through this story, one of the things that really captivated me about this story, a lot of times when we're covering these things, yes, people have an observation, and yes, they're brilliant, but there's always this bit of element of luck. There's a little bit of this catching lightning in a bottle. Conrad Hilton was terribly unlucky, and it's amazing the things that he had to overcome.
Oh,
This
wow.
guy did not have luck on his side. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this story, which makes me admire him more, actually.
Sure. And as I think about what that brand means to me before I know the story, I don't think in my youth I had a whole lot of experience staying at a Hilton hotel, but there were certain hotel brands that meant something that people understood.
Yeah.
Right? If you were staying at a Holiday Inn on an interstate highway, if it had the word Holidome on it, you're in for a nice swim and a good time
Yeah.
in an air conditioned big space.
Yes.
And if you had the money and you were traveling for business or something, you knew that the Hilton brand
Yes.
would would be a consistently better experience than most one-off hotels. Most. But
Now,
there was always every downtown always had one grand hotel,
yes.
right? But then if they had a Hilton too, you'd say, oh, well, the Hilton, right? Because the other ones have their quirks,
Yeah,
but
and
the
I think
Hilton was always going to be the like a business traveler's hotel.
I travel a fair bit, and I like staying in Hiltons. But I think before we go into the story, I think there's one mistake though that and hopefully somebody from Hilton listens to this and calls us, and we can help them clean this up for them. They have one mistake that I think they've all done because they all now have all sorts of different brands, right? They like Hilton's got like
Hmm.
24 different labels or whatever. Here's the thing that they need to do. They need to look at each one of them and make them stand for something. I've
Hmm.
stayed in enough Hiltons and the different Hilton ones, I can actually tell you what the difference between a Garden Inn and a Hilton is. But that has come from years of travel. What
Yeah.
they need to say is if you're looking for this, Garden Inn. If you're looking for this, Hilton.
Yeah.
And all Hiltons have this. And like they need to actually create those standards and tell the customer what it is. So a customer can sit there and go, oh, yeah, I'm getting in late at night. So having a restaurant actually in the hotel is important to me. Like a good
Sure.
restaurant in the hotel is important to me.
Well,
So, and they're all, and Marriott's doing it. They're all doing that. They're all making that mistake.
I stayed in one of the new Hilton brands. I don't even remember the name of it because it wasn't a very memorable name, but it was. And I might even have had the numeral 2 in it. But
Home too.
Home 2 maybe, yeah. And it was a pretty cool concept because they had like packaged foods and place you could buy some
Yeah,
a drink late at night.
right. But on their
I
website,
stayed I stayed in one for jury duty.
right. Well, imagine how cool it would be if you went onto the website and had there was a little summary of each
Yeah.
one. This is the experience you're going to get at this place, and then you can sit there and go, oh, that's the one. That's the one that will fit me for this trip. Because even some
Yeah.
trips, it's different, right? But anyway, we digress. Let's go back to the beginning of the Hilton story.
Mhm. Tell us about
So
Conrad.
May 31st, 1919 is when Conrad started the Hilton in Cisco. And today again, 7,500 locations. So Conrad Hilton was in the state legislature in New Mexico.
Okay.
And his father passes away and he inherits 5 grand. And he hears about this bank failure in Texas. And he decides, I could probably buy that cheap and turn it around. So he
A
travels to
bank.
Texas. Yes, I don't know what bank it was, but he travels to Texas. And in the process of negotiating buying of this bank, the price goes up way beyond the $5,000. So he doesn't buy it. But when he's in Texas, here's what he notices. It's in Texas in 1919, and Texas is booming due to oil at that time.
Hmm.
There's workers flocking to the field. And he stays at this hotel, the Mobley Hotel, and it's 40 overcrowded rooms. And it's terrible, full of people, it's dirty, no clean linens. And Conrad looks around and he notices that workers are all staying mostly in places like this, like they're boarding houses or they're inns, and they're selling the beds for 8 hours, and there's no
Hmm.
amenities. Like they are basically flop houses, all of
Yeah,
them.
you're just bunking. You're hot bunking with people. Ugh.
Yeah. And that's what's going on. And he looks at it and he says, "Huh, there's an idea here. Maybe this is the future." So he approaches the owner of the Mobley Hotel and he buys the hotel for $3,000. But he has no idea about the hotel business. And he has to reinvest in it and reimagine it. And he decides to create standards. So he wants it to be good looking and clean. So that's his idea.
Okay.
Let's make it good looking and clean.
I mean, that today seems like a pretty low bar,
Was a low,
but
right.
back then,
But back then, no one was doing
yeah,
that.
that's crazy.
But here's the other thing. It was unprofitable at first because most of the travelers were laborers and they didn't have a lot of money to spend. So it wasn't like he
Hmm.
could raise the price to cover it. So he's struggling a little bit. It's not making money. But what he notices, again, observations,
Hmm.
customer behavior, eliminating friction. When we talk about eliminating friction is making things easier for the customer. What does he notice?
Stay tuned. We're going to wrap up this story and tell you how to apply this lesson to your business right after this.
Hey, Rick, I'm glad we got out again.
Yeah,
What's going on?
my digital advertising's got more expensive and it doesn't seem to be working as well.
I see.
Nice drive, by the way.
So,
I don't know how I'm going to keep growing. I feel like I'm going sideways, flattening out.
oh,
Yeah,
did you speak to Steven?
you mean this podcast host?
Yep.
Not yet.
Do you like going sideways?
No, I want to be growing.
Well,
Starter session.
yep,
5 iron?
sure. Oh, and you can book your free starter session on this podcast website.
Your turn, Dave.
Let's pick up our story where we left off, and trust me, you haven't missed a thing.
What does he notice? People who are staying in the hotel are constantly asking, where can I get tobacco? Where can I
Mm.
buy a newspaper? So what does he add to the hotel? Tobacco shop, newsstand, and a novelty store. He's the
Okay.
absolute first to do that in a hotel.
To be a bit of a merchant in your own hotel lobby.
The reason why this merchandising works, it was actually helping the customer. Customer didn't have
Yeah.
to say, where do I buy tobacco? Tobacco's right there. Where can I get today's newspaper? Right here.
And they weren't just like behind the front desk. He actually built that, like they were little shops
Little
inside the
shops
hotel.
inside the hotel. And he was the first to do that in a hotel. Absolute
Okay.
first. 1924, he's now making money. That the sales from those shops was enough to turn the business from unprofitable to profitable.
Wow. All right,
Right?
that's pretty cool.
That is cool. So Conrad decides to expand, but instead of renovating, he because he wants to be able to do a better job of putting these shops in, he decides he should build from scratch. And what he wants to do is build a hotel a year.
Just
That's
one a
it.
year.
One a
Okay.
year. So he starts borrowing and building. And in addition, he wanted to add other amenities such as a dining room.
Hmm.
So now I can also feed you and running water in the room.
Wait, what?
Right. Well, the part we forget about is in the 1920s in the United States, most people didn't have running water in their homes.
Yeah.
Most people were still like using the privy out back, and most hotels were use the privy out back, right?
Or down the hall,
Or
right at
down
the
the
end of the
hall.
hall.
Yeah. So he decides to add dining room, add running water. 1925 is the first hotel to have his name, the Dallas Hilton, first
Okay.
one to hold the Hilton name. He opens 4 more across Texas, and he puts air conditioning in one of them. And look, air conditioning
Oh
doesn't
man.
become common for 40 years. For many guests, it's their first experience with air conditioning.
Mm.
So after 8 years, he has 7 hotels, and he opens his flagship hotel, 19-story, 300-room El Paso, the one with the air conditioning, costs him $2 million to build, and he opens that flagship 19 days before the crash of 1929,
Oh, wow. And where was this? Was in El Paso?
El Paso.
Okay.
So when we talk about bad luck,
Yeah, 19 days.
you just opened a $2 million hotel that you've borrowed money to build, huge,
Mm,
300 rooms, 19 days before the crash.
okay.
So what happens during the Great Depression? What happens to travel? Like it disappears. So
Sure.
he has to cut costs everywhere. He encloses entire floors. He sells furniture. He does everything he can to save money and raise cash. By 1933, he's closed all the hotels but one, the El Paso,
Oh, man.
right? The 300-room one he built. He moves himself and the family into the hotel to save money. That's where they're living, and he's on the edge of losing everything. But 1940 comes and he's weathered the depression and he kept the El Paso alive. When the U.S. enters the war, one of the things he notices is that first people are fleeing Los Angeles because they think it's going to be invaded. But he
Mm,
also notices the Army's moving lots of people to
California.
California because of the war effort. And so he decides he's going to relocate to the West Coast. He feels LA is a great target. So he gets wind of Arnold Kutkaby, who has a hotel called the Townhouse that he wants to get rid of quickly. So
Hmm.
Conrad in 1942 buys the Townhouse Hotel. And 3 years later, LA is booming. He goes on a buying spree. He's now recovered. He buys 2 hotels in New York City, one being the Roosevelt, which becomes the first hotel in the world to have TVs in the guest room.
Oh, man.
So
Okay.
again, constantly improving the experience. Like we talk about improving the experience, but he constantly did it, right?
Yeah.
Newsstands in the hotel, restaurants in the hotel, running water in the hotel, air conditioning in the hotel, TVs in the room.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So business is booming because we're now into the 1950s and there's a boom in passenger travel due to the jet engine,
Hmm.
right? And he brings his two sons into the business, Conrad and Baron. And Conrad's the older brother who he's grooming, but Baron's the ambitious one. And Baron's the one who actually ends up doing some things in the future. But Hilton is now the largest chain in the United States, and they decide to start expanding outside of the US. First place,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico.
Huh.
Puerto
Okay.
Rico is where they go first, and then Cuba. So he
Mm.
opens the Havana Hilton, huge hotel, 630 rooms. Less than 3 months later, guess what happens?
No.
Right. Castro takes over, Cuba collapses. Like when I said this guy had
That is
bad
bad
luck,
timing.
19 days before the crash, less than two
Yeah.
months before Castro,
Oh,
but Hilton still managed to survive this. Like they are survivors, right?
yeah.
So by 1964, they have 65 properties. Debt is really high. Expansion outside the United States is not working as well as they want. Baron Hilton wants to make his mark on the business. Baron brokers a deal. And here's the deal he brokers in 1966. Unload all the foreign hotels, sells them all to TWA,
To
the airline.
TWA.
The
Okay.
airline. Now, if you got to remember, at the time in the mid 60s, TWA was owned by Howard Hughes and was the most successful airline of the time.
Yeah.
Like they were huge. And if you're ever in New York City, if you're ever flying through JFK, stay at the TWA hotel. It's cool, man. They've
I saw a couple
renovated.
of your social media posts on that.
Oh
Yeah, it
yeah,
looked great.
it is worth the trip. But so because what TWA wants to become is a one-stop shop for travel. That was what their vision was. So TWA buys these hotels, and the hotels will be owned by TWA, but they'll keep the Hilton name,
Okay.
right? So huge deal, sells them, has all these stocks. Everybody's all celebrating. Barron becomes president of the Hilton, and then guess what happens over the next 18 months?
I'm trying to think, what's the time period? I don't
66.
know.
Over the next
66.
18 months, TWA stock collapses,
Oh,
falls in half.
oh no.
Unlucky thing number three. Right? Like, so they now got this whole issue that was what was supposed to help them like with their debt loads. And now they're stuck with this stock that's not doing well. So they need to turn the tide. So Barron decides to look for locations with potential but have fallen out of favor. So
Hmm.
it's the late 60s, early 1970s. What is a place that has kind of fallen out of favor? He goes to Vegas, baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
Goes to Vegas. And in 1970, he buys the International Hotel and the Flamingo. The
Okay.
International has an interesting asset. They have 4 years remaining on the contract with Elvis,
Okay.
right? So Hilton becomes the first public company in charge of a casino. He reinvents the casino hotel, brings in, like they were doing the entertainment thing, but he leans into the entertainment. He leans into adding the amenities, making the pools amazing and these big bars. They build the largest hotel in the world there. And he adds things like progressive slot machine. So the whole
Mm,
idea is, where the payout gets bigger and bigger and bigger, which creates
sure.
huge word of mouth and publicity. Replaces security, personal security officers with video cameras. Does all of this stuff to reinvent the hotel experience in
The
Vegas.
whole experience.
And
Yeah.
these two hotels go on to make as much money as the rest of the hotels combined.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. So the part that I loved about Hilton under Conrad Hilton and under Barron is this whole idea of just continually improving the customer experience.
Mhm. And
Continue
counting on that.
and counting on. Yes.
And
Yes.
it brings them through these 3 big crises.
Yes.
Like he doesn't stop innovating for the customer,
No. No.
right? I think that's a huge lesson.
Yes, yes. And doing and look, it seems obvious. Oh, put a TV in a hotel room. Wasn't obvious. They were the first to do it. Others
Yeah.
could have done it. Oh, let's put air conditioning in a hotel. First to do it. Others could have done it. Oh, let's put a restaurant in a hotel. Like these things seem so obvious, but it's
Mhm.
always obvious after it's done,
Yeah.
right? And so the question I think listeners should be asking themselves is what are things that they can do today for their customers that make the experience better, that removes
Mhm.
that friction? And yeah, operationally, it's going to be a challenge. It'd be really easy for Conrad Hilton to say, well, I'm not going to put a restaurant in a hotel. I know nothing about restaurants. We're not in the
Sure.
restaurant business, we're in the hotel business.
But we can find people that know restaurants.
But how often do we hear that from customers where they go,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, 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 but right? Now, granted,
Yeah.
he started with easy things like a newsstand, but it was this would not only make the customer experience better, but it also turned his idea from unprofitable into profitable.
And you think about how many of those ideas just became, the minimum expectation that we have now for any hotel.
Yes.
And he did it first, right? We expect
And
to
he
be able
did.
to get a cup of coffee in the hotel. We expect to get to find a newspaper. I don't know if that's the big deal anymore, but
But yes, it is today. The things that he did that were the first is now the minimum bar. And man, unlucky, but they overcame all of it.
yeah.
So I admire like Conrad Hilton, and there's a survivor, eh?
And all that income, all that wealth building allowed us to watch the saga of Paris Hilton whenever that happened.
there, there- there is that. There's always an extra silver lining to every cloud.
She'd have been nothing without these guys. She'd just have been, just another girl in Hollywood. So yeah, thank you for bringing us that.
All right. Thanks, David.
Thank you. I appreciate the story of Hilton.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please share us, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and leave us a big, fat, juicy 5-star rating and review at Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to schedule your own 90-minute empire building session, you can do it at empirebuildingprogram.com.